Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, and this is a show where we hang out, we talk about games, we talk about things that are exciting, things that are beautiful, things that inspire us. And before we get started into our topic for today, I don't know, John Doom. First of all, good morning to John and Padre and Mark. I don't know if it's the Savage Pathfinder launch day, but I do know that later today, this will be going live. So I'm going to post a link in the chat here. Good friends of the show, Star Angle Studios, are going to be launching their Savage Secret World project. They just completed their fulfillment for the Secret World, the old MMO about urban fantasy for 5th edition, and now they're doing the Savage Worlds version of it. I'm actually going to be on Savage Universe pretty late on Thursday, about 10 o'clock Eastern. I'm going to be talking with Ross Brandon about Savage Secret World. I'm excited. I loved playing Secret World back in the day. If it does well enough, there may be some, there will be some stretch goals. That's all I'm going to say. And I'm really looking forward to it. They have almost 700 followers on their Kickstarter now. They're going live here shortly. So if you haven't followed yet, follow that link that I just sent that in the chat. That will allow you to follow their Kickstarter and be notified as soon as it goes live. So we're in a series on prep. And let me kind of reiterate, you should prep for your game to shore up the things that you don't feel you're as good at as a GM. Monster tactics, something that constantly frustrates you. Take notes on monster tactics. Go out and buy the book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and kind of see how tactics can be used. Problems bringing your NPCs to life. Well, take a moment to really focus on the NPCs and get inside their head. Write down what their traits are, what their motivations are, what their personal agendas are. Descriptions. If you always feel like your descriptions are coming up short, that's what you should prep. You should spend time developing your own box text, including as many senses as you possibly can. I cannot overestimate or overemphasize the use of smell and sound. Those are two senses we very rarely get in most descriptive text. Most descriptive text is describing what our characters can see. That's what you prep. You prep for the things that you don't feel as strong in. I think it was Brandon Lee Mulligan who said that he uses D&D 5th edition to tell the stories that he likes to tell, because the role-playing, the drama, that's all stuff that comes naturally to him. He needs a system to adjudicate the combat side of things. So he picked a system that helped shore up what he was not as strong as a game master or a dungeon master. Yes, Padre, 5 senses. I can also tell you that in a horror game, the sense of taste and touch should ramp up as well, because players don't like it when you describe something brushing against their skin or sliding down the back of their spacesuit. I'm getting in the mind of Alien. I'm running a Alien RPG one-shot. I'm going to do Chariot of the Gods tonight, so we'll see how that turns out. But I'm trying to focus on, hey, here's the things that I want to make sure come to the forefront. Another great thing is if you have to do some exposition, some info dump to both help the players because you're running a prepared adventure, or because it's information that's going to help the players in the future, make sure part of your prep is those little bullet points. So that's why we're talking about prep. Prep is... Some people get very anxious about prep. How much prep do I have to do as a dungeon master? As much as you need to. Typically, before a game starts, that's kind of what we're talking about today, I do hours of prep. But once the game starts, I'm doing maybe 15 to 20 minutes per hour I'm planning on running to get all of my prep together. A battle between Korn and Nurgle. That's what I thought too, Padre. Yes, John, you say something like, copper, rot, You describe sounds in eerie ways. Um, the fetid wind is heavy and moist as it kind of blows against the back of your neck and then kind of draws back as if something's breathing behind you or upping the atmosphere. But when it comes to campaigns or worlds, how do I prep a world? That's kind of what we're talking about, because I'm deep in the midst of prepping for Vendom, a game that's coming out now. Again, prep to your level of comfort and need. When I'm prepping for creating a new campaign setting, I'm putting in somewhere between 10 and 40 hours getting my campaign world set up. And here's why. I want to know the world that we're playing in so well, inside out, upside down, top to bottom, left to right, so that at the table, I don't have to spend a lot of time pausing and looking things up. I want, once we hit the table, for it to be a very organic and natural experience for myself and the players. I want to know the world so well that when the players do something, I can go, knowing what I know about the world, here's the logical answer to what you just said. As opposed to going, hold on, I know I read that somewhere. Let me consult the volume of texts. And I'll be honest, that takes prep. It takes time to understand a world that well. And you may not want to do that. You may be like, but JM, I want to get to the table right now. We're going to talk about two different world design approaches and world prep approaches today on Behind the Screen. So there is the top down. That's kind of where I live. That's my wheelhouse. Big high concept, moving down and setting everything up so that the adventure can start. Now, I'm not talking about prepping a storyline. I'm talking about prepping a world, prepping an area, a region, a town, prepping a place that is chocked full of so many adventure hooks that your players can't help but stumble upon them and pick up the threads they want and run with them. So what do I mean by top down? So that's where you start with your high level and work down into the minutia. That's how I started with Jackals. Jackals was, I wanted to do a Bronze Age fantasy world, kind of because I was in my master's program. And I was reading a lot of texts. I was reading Gilgamesh and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Old Testament and the Baal cycle and Egyptian mythology and Hittite mythology. So I had all of this additional prep work that I was able to get in under the disguise of prepping for papers and tests. But if you're designing your own world, really what you need to do is you need to focus on a couple of main ingredients. What is the central conflict? Who is involved with it? And what do they want? If you can answer those three questions, you basically have yourself an action setting. This is how I did it with Crucible. I said, what's the central conflict? Well, I really wanted a tension between the idea... Well, first of all, what was my theme? My theme was I wanted to do something Planescape inspired, because Planescape is one of the great RPG settings of my youth that I own every Planescape book and box set sitting on the shelf right over there, and I adore it. But I wanted to do my own thing. So the idea was, hey, I wanted a city at the center of the multiverse, but like JM's multiverse, not kind of the D&D multiverse, because I have games that all kind of interconnect. And so the central conflict would be, how is power channeled through this central hub of reality? That's why I called it Arcanopunk, because punk really is about power. Who has it, who doesn't, who needs it, who wants it, and what are they willing to do to control it? All right, well, once I have that idea, and the fact that the city is controlling the city is the key to controlling the rest of the reality, well, then I needed to know who was involved. And usually in games, this takes place in factions. Factions can be anything from guilds, churches, crime families, mega corporations. I'm trying to think of, religious orders. Like, think of your favorite novels, movies, TV shows, games. You can see why factions are important. And then basically, what does each faction want as it relates to the central theme? And once you have that, you have just scoped out the top-down view of your game. If you don't want to do that, because that sometimes can be a lot of work. I say that as somebody who loves that work, but it can be a lot of work. And sometimes we don't need a top-down view of prep. But the top-down view, what it gives you is it gives you the biggest and widest and broadest view of your game world so that you know, hey, here's the themes, here's the major conflict, and here are all of the players. With that knowledge, I can interact with the players as they interact with the world and kind of have a logical response to any questions or situations they throw themselves in. And this can be anything from, I want to know all of the Forgotten Realms, to I'm setting a game in Baldur's Gate, to use D&D as kind of our lingua franca. The same top-down prep works for either. What's my theme? What's my conflict? Who are the players and what do they want? You just go from like the Masked Lords in Waterdeep to potentially all of the kingdoms and nations in Forgotten Realms. What megacorps are involved in this area of Seattle if you're playing Shadowrun? What does the Twilight Legion want with the Reckoners in this part of California if you're playing Deadlands? That Shadowrun one was for you, Mark. So what's the bottom-up approach? I think the bottom-up approach to world design is wonderful. It allows for a lot more surprises for both the GM and the player, but it does mean that you're going to have to fly a lot more by the seat of your pants. And what the bottom-up approach is, start with one point. Start with a city, an adventure, a module. In fact, for a bottom-up approach, you might want to just start with the players kicking in the door to the dungeon, the fight, the boss, whatever. Start in media res. Because the idea is you only have to know this little concentric circle because it's all your players are going to interact with that night. You don't need to know who the gods and goddesses of the setting are. You just need to know that there's a temple to Thumian, Lord of the Sun, in this area. And that's it. It allows you to focus your prep really small, and as players ask questions, you're going to be in charge of filling out more and more information, if that makes sense. Hey, what's over that hill? A valley filled with spiders, and you got to write that down. So yes, Padre summed it up so much nicer than I did. This is the plotter versus pantser approach to writing. Plotter is top-down. So, top-down is I want everything plotted out, all of the Brandon Sanderson model of putting together a novel. The pantser goes, what's in my pocket? And that's where the adventure starts from. In a lot of ways, Tolkien is the example of both. He did a lot of prep for his world, but when he was writing Lord of the Rings, he kept discovering new things and having to start back over and do complete rewrites because new things inspired him and surprised him. I think the great American pantser, if I can say it that way, is Stephen King. Stephen King says he's always surprised on where the story takes him. He just keeps writing to see what's going to happen and to find out what's going on. A great book on both of these approaches and kind of what you want to put together for your players and yourself is Arbiter of Worlds by a friend of the show, Alexander Macrease. And in that way, when he talks about campaign settings, he talks about the top-down approach, the bottom-up approach, and then really, if you're putting together a campaign setting or a world, or in my opinion, if you are running a game in an established world, this advice takes the same track, here's how many pages you should devote to fleshing out your world. So he'll say, like, do the ancient history, the forgotten history, and the recent history, and put together some information on factions and some information on sites. Now, if you're coming up with your own campaign world, that's great. You get to do all of that from scratch. But here's the thing. I follow that same advice when I'm prepping a game for a game world that's established. I'm doing this right now for my Shadows of Estrin game. That's going to happen sometime later this year. I'm walking through and putting together a little cheat sheet for me, about 5 pages. What's the ancient history of the region? What's the lost history? What's the recent history? That way I know it real well because I've had to take what I've read and rewrite it. What are the factions? What are the interesting secrets that I want to have happen in this game? Cool. Now that I have all that, I can take that down, which is my information, which I now know better because I have processed it, reiterated it, and wrote it down. And then I chop that up for the players to about 1 page. I think it's fair to say to your players, I will read 1 page worth of background if you will read 1 to 2 pages worth of setting background. I always find it weird that a player will want me to read their 5 to 10 page background on their character, but can't be bothered to read the 2 to 3 pages I put together on the setting. Tit for tat, man. Like, this is the way it works. So that's how I go about prepping a campaign or prepping a world. We'll probably get into like design questions next week. Like, hey, as I'm working through Vendom, what are some things that I'm focused on from a designer's perspective? But for this was like how to prep and plan for a campaign. Hopefully, high level, it was useful to you. Maybe come up with some ideas that you didn't have before. If you like what we're doing, please follow here either on YouTube or on Twitch, or join us over at patreon.com/iconic production. John Doom says, I have a decent amount of background info because the players' backgrounds are easier to fill in if there's some foreknowledge of the world that they grew up in. Exactly. It helps the player who knows the world better interact with the world better. So, on Thursday, we're going to be talking about actual campaign prep. So not a world, but plots, ideas. How do I do that? Why do I do it? Is it a railroad or a sandbox? Which is better? And I think the answer is always somewhere in the middle. Anytime you have 2 points, my gut is always somewhere in the middle is actually where the truth lies. So that's it for today. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. I'm JM. This has been Behind the Screen, and I will see you all on Thursday. Go check out the Secret Savage World Kickstarter. It's going live at in about an hour and 40 minutes. About noon central is when it goes live. So, till next time, have a good one.